Jeremy Corbyn's plan to tackle millionaires' pay packet. A teenager is arrested over the death of a young girl. And a new A&E warning. You're watching 5 News Tonight. The Labour leader reveals his vision for a maximum wage for the highest earners and how to manage immigration. Police name a 7-year-old girl killed in York as Katie Ruff. A 15-year-old is being questioned. And frontline medics say more than a third of accident and emergency departments are now dangerously overcrowded. Also tonight, as President Obama prepares to say goodbye to the White House, we'll be talking about his legacy. How will America's first black president be remembered? Good evening, welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Matt Barbett. It was supposed to be the day that Jeremy Corbyn relaunched himself in a bid to win back voters. Instead, he's been accused of offering mixed messages on immigration and pay. This morning he said he wanted to introduce a maximum wage, saying the salaries of footballers and city fat cats are grotesque. But that seemed to catch out some of his own MPs, while critics called the plans unworkable. It wasn't until a speech this afternoon that Mr Corbyn's proposals became a bit clearer. We'll discuss them in a moment, but first, our political editor Andy Bell reports.
Peterborough voted strongly for Brexit, but not so long ago the city had a Labour MP. So could this be a target for the opposition? Jeremy Corbyn thinks so. The Labour leader chose to come here to give a speech to launch him into the new year. But even before that, he'd opened up a surprise new line of attack, suggesting government should intervene to cap excessive earnings.
I would like to see a maximum earnings limit, quite honestly, because I think that would be a fairer thing to do. Because we cannot set ourselves up as being a sort of grossly unequal bargain basement economy on the shores of Europe. We have to be something that is more egalitarian.
Not surprisingly, that's gone down badly with the bosses.
There are very few countries in the rest of the world that have followed this path, and their economies, thinking specifically of Cuba and Venezuela, are not necessarily ones that the United Kingdom might want to emulate in a post-European Union world. We need to send a message to the globe, to the global business community, that we're open, that we're ambitious and that we're entrepreneurial, and that success is celebrated, not punished.
Back in the city centre, we found those weren't necessarily the magic words.
There's a naivety to it and a lack of pragmatism and practicality.
I feel that's the wrong approach. I think if we just ensured that high earners paid their fair share of tax, that should be enough to do it.
Jeremy Corbyn's speech was mainly about Brexit, and on immigration, he refused to commit to bringing the numbers down.
Unlike the Tories, we won't offer any false promises or sow division by scapegoating migrants, because we know where that leads to. The worrying and, to me, frightening rise in race hate crime and division in recent months, and how the issue of immigration can be used as a proxy to abuse or intimidate minority communities within our society. We're not wedded to free movement to the EU as a point of principle, but I don't want to be misinterpreted, nor do we rule it out.
Jeremy Corbyn says he doesn't want to set a target of bringing it down. Do you think he's right?
I think he should. No, I think he should bring it down. Yeah, I do. I hope so, because as I say, I think there's too many.
I think he's right not to set a target, because if he does make a target and then doesn't follow through with it, it's going to make him look worse.
I think he needs a clearer position on it. I don't think it can be so woolly and so vague.
The Labour leader's been marginalised by Brexit. He and his party have to find a distinctive approach to the biggest challenge facing the country today. Andy Bell, 5 News, Peterborough.
I'm joined now by former Business Minister Joe Swinson, who is chair of the Policy Forum of the CIPD, the Human Resources Professional Body, and also City analyst David Buick is with us as well. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Is he tapping into something here, Joe, that the situation as it stands seems pretty unfair to most people?
Well, I might not agree with his prescription, but I certainly think there is an issue around executive pay. We've seen in the last 20 years that the gap between chief execs and average employees in organisations has tripled, and now it's 183 times what the average employee earns. And I think that there's a lot of people that are understandably thinking that just isn't fair, particularly when it's not actually linked to performance of the organisation.
David, you come across these people who earn around £5 million a year, chief executives of FTSE 100 companies. Do they think it's fair, or do they think perhaps we should pay a little bit more in tax
Well, the first thing I want to do is to say that I agree with Joe that since 1996, when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, the gap between those that have and those that have not has widened every single year, and it is totally unacceptable. What I don't agree with Jeremy Corbyn about is how you actually set about it. The question of putting ceilings on salaries, it's such a nebulous thing to do. People would get round it by offering share incentive schemes and various other things. What I don't believe is at all satisfactory is what I call the self-governance of companies, which I think is deplorable. And
So they decide how much they get at the top end and how much
the other
people
thing
get
is
at the
also
bottom
that
end.
I think that the shareholders have abrogated their responsibility to a ridiculous degree. A lot of this has happened because chief executives and very senior people in position, and Joe is in a better position to talk about this than anybody, have been offered unbelievably generous contracts for very long periods of time. So when you hose somebody out that you don't think he's doing a particularly good job, you have to pay an awful lot of money. All this kind of legislation, in my opinion, needs looking at.
Because, Joe, governments of different colours have decided that they need to have a look at pay, and we've seen that with the minimum wage, or the living wage, as the Conservatives like to call it. So why shouldn't higher pay be properly looked at right now?
Well, I think we should be looking at it, and not least because it's important for business performance. So CIPD research shows that 6 in 10 employees find that the fact that CEOs are so highly paid is actually a demotivating factor for them at work. So it actually is holding back performance of organisations.
But if they continue to become demonised, David, in a globalised society, globalised economy, they're just going to go somewhere else.
Well, there's 3 categories, Matt, and I'd be interested in what Joe thinks, what I'm assessing of this. One is the entrepreneur. Now, the entrepreneur who's built his business from up, whether he's Bill Gates, whether he's Sir Martin Sorrell, whether he's Steve Jobs, and he's got a humpback carrying it all the way to the bank with billions of dollars. I don't care, because he's created so much wealth for the countries around the world. Managers, I have a problem with. A FTSE 100 company CEO, there was a very good case 3 or 4 years ago with Reckitt Benckiser. I think the CEO took $39 million out of the ring in a year. There is no way you will persuade me that that is a fair day's pay.
And it's worth pointing out that Bill Gates is incredibly philanthropic, for example, is
Absolutely.
putting a lot of money towards trying to cure diseases.
Very quickly, Joe, if I could just say, the other thing I think is very important is the little business. It's the SMEs that are going to be the growth of this country, and they must be given every encouragement in the world. And I do not want them to get a good slapping where they're trying to get their act together.
So, Joe, let me just put this to you.
Sorry,
We've
Joe.
been stuck at this point where we have 45% tax as the high rate. Why aren't we taxing more when it comes to people earning in excess of £500,000 or £1 million a year? Surely they should be taxed more, shouldn't they?
Well, and there are discussions that are regularly had about that, and particularly in terms of taxing wealth, taxing capital gains in different ways as well, because of course the packages are not often just made up of pay in terms of salary. So there is a question there, but I think there's also a question about transparency and shareholders. You know, we introduced the binding votes on pay policy for shareholders, but I think making sure shareholders really use that power is important, that people are held accountable for their performance.
Very out of time, David, but many of us sort of form that point, don't we, of being shareholders via our pensions or via other things. Maybe the rest of us really need to take these people.
One very last comment. Remember, 1% of the country pays 27% of the income tax. So the people that think that the higher earners don't pay their way, they're wrong.
We should have the transparency so that we can all have the debate.
Thank you both very much indeed. Now, a 15-year-old girl is being questioned by police over the death of a 7-year-old girl who was found in a field near houses in York. In the last hour, the young girl has been named as Katie Ruff. Witnesses have described hearing her mother crying and screaming after she arrived at the scene yesterday afternoon. From York, Peter Lane reports.
A photograph issued tonight of 7-year-old Katie Ruff. A brief statement from her family says they are devastated by her tragic death. Earlier, we saw the white suits of forensic officers and a police tent sealing off the spot on the outskirts of York where Katie had been found, suffering what police described as life-threatening injuries. She was taken to hospital but couldn't be saved. Witnesses say Katie's mother was among the first to get to the scene. Rob McCartney lives just metres away from where the girl was found.
A woman ran up the street. That was obviously the mother of the daughter. She was shouting help. called for an ambulance. So I put my shoes on and went to go up the alleyway. When I got halfway up and I could see a body lying in the field, but the police were already there attending. And then the mother had come down and she was obviously very, very distraught. After we asked her, was she okay? She said, no, I think she's killed her.
The street leading to the footpath and field beyond has been cordoned off for most of the day. Police say a 15-year-old girl was arrested in connection with the death last night, and they've described this as a particularly sensitive case.
15-year-old girl has been arrested in connection with the incident and remains in police custody. Officers have conducted house-to-house inquiries in the area and remain working at the scene while the investigation continues. Specially trained officers are supporting the victim's family at this extremely difficult time for them.
As word spread, well-wishers brought flowers to the street, unable to understand what had happened here, but moved to pay their respects. One bouquet had a handwritten message reading, "Night night, my darling Princess Katie, love Nana and Grandad." Peter Lane, 5 News.
Next, just how many accident and emergency departments in England are struggling to cope this winter? The Health Secretary told us yesterday he's only worried about a few. But today, the group that represents A&E doctors said more than a third are dangerously overcrowded. Our health correspondent Catherine Jones has the latest details.
In hospitals across England, the pressure is unrelenting. Winter always brings more frail and elderly people in, but this year our wards are fuller than ever. So more patients than ever are ending up stuck in A&E. Like Philip, who spent 6 hours on a trolley after suffering a mini stroke last week.
The scene is very, very depressing and worrying, because you immediately see these trolleys with people in various states of physical breakdown. As I said, some of them have got masks on, so they're quite seriously ill. They lay out flat, they're not moving at all.
Yesterday, the Health Secretary told me only a limited number of hospitals were struggling.
There's a few hospitals which have had very sustained and difficult problems.
Today, A&E doctors spoke out to challenge that view. There are 152 hospital trusts in England, each with a target of dealing with 95% of A&E patients within 4 hours. But a snapshot survey by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine suggests 4 out of 10 A&E departments in England are only managing to deal with 75% of patients within that target time.
There is a real crisis out there, and I do not know what world the Secretary of State inhabits, but it's not the world that my colleagues in A&E departments throughout the country are experiencing on a day-by-day basis at the moment.
Last night on his way home, surgeon Rishi Deer came across a cyclist who'd been hit by a car.
So this is an emergency. You can't move these patients because they could potentially be paralysed.
At work and off duty, he sees a service stretched beyond its limits.
I called the ambulance and they told me that they'd be at least 50 minutes for a trauma patient who was an absolute emergency. And then on coming to work this morning, I found that my operating list, because I work as a surgeon, we didn't have the beds available to do the non-emergency operations as well. This is a problem because of underfunding, because of cutting throughout hospitals, and something needs to be done about it.
The usual pattern is for winter pressures to peak in the 3rd week of January. That's next week. And with freezing temperatures forecast, which always increases demand, A&E staff and their colleagues across the NHS can only brace themselves for the days ahead. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
Still to come on 5 News tonight. Yet more strike misery for Southern Rail passengers. We put unions and the rail company on the spot.
Why is the management of Southern Rail so bad at planning ahead that they've allowed this situation to happen?
And we'll hear from the man behind this 500-foot snooker trick shot. It is amazing. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back, you're watching 5 News Tonight. They pay thousands of pounds every year for a service to get to work, appointments or to visit friends and relatives. But once again today, Southern Rail passengers have had their plans thrown into chaos because of another strike. It's the first walkout of 2017 after plenty last year, and it's all because bosses and unions cannot resolve their row about driver-only trains, as Dominic Reynolds explains.
Take a look at the battle lines in the country's most bitter industrial dispute. No movement at all this morning. It is the 31st day of Southern Rail industrial action in 9 months, and there are 5 more days to come before the end of January. Here is one of the line's 300,000 daily passengers, and in Surrey, Jackie's just lost another day of income. She's a freelance London tour guide who can't get to London.
It's ridiculous. If this was a natural disaster causing the delays, one wouldn't mind. But this is an artificial situation which they need to sort out.
But even when there isn't a strike, Jackie says being a Southern passenger is hard work. In this stack, just her most recent claims for compensation because trains were over 30 minutes late. The dispute is about whether some responsibilities can be taken away from conductors and given to train drivers. And in an empty Victoria station, Southern Rail insisted they're not preparing the ground for job cuts. Now, I'm not one of your commuters. Jackie is. This is what she wanted to ask you.
Why is the management of Southern Rail so bad at planning ahead that they've allowed this situation to happen? Were they looking for a fight with the unions at the commuters' expense?
Well, we absolutely don't want to pick a fight with the unions, and we don't want our passengers left in the middle. The changes that we're making here happen every single day. It's not new.
But it leaves the door open in the future for those jobs to be removed, doesn't it?
So to demonstrate our commitment to having a second person on the train, we are recruiting an extra 100 people to make sure that we have sufficient staff to be able to roster on the train.
And do the unions understand quite how exasperated passengers are? One way or another, they want this to end. What would you say to them?
Well, we want it to end. You know, it's not in our interest for drivers to be losing money.
Do you think that you're losing a bit of sympathy with the way this is dragging on?
Well, if I had to pay some of the fares that some of these people have to pay and haven't had a pay rise for years and see some of the comparisons that are being made, I fully understand it.
Both sides say they sympathise with commuters, but neither's budged an inch for a long time. What happens in this dispute will likely affect future decisions on other UK services. So the outcome of this southern battle could go far beyond the south. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News.
Now, one is a glitzy musical about making it big in Hollywood. The other is a gritty drama about making ends meet below the poverty line in Newcastle. But both La La Land and I, Daniel Blake, are up for a BAFTA for Best Film. The director behind the British entry is Ken Loach, and today he spoke to Minnie Stevenson about his own film and its rival.
There perhaps can be no greater form of escapism. The uplifting musical about falling in love in Hollywood has even charmed our cynical Brits. The film has 11 BAFTA nominations, more than any other.
On the street, you could lose everything.
Cut to its main competition and a story of stark contrast. I, Daniel Blake, a tale of life on benefits in the northeast of England, and the most nominated British movie, with 5, including Best Film. Today, its director, Ken Loach, spoke to 5 News about why at 80 he came back from semi-retirement to make this film.
The film before last was quite heavy, and I thought it was a bit much for an elderly gent. We had so many stories of people in the situation we show in the film who are fighting a state bureaucracy just to get what they're entitled to. Insofar as we were able to help them to have their voices heard, then yes, we'd like to share it with them.
No, you won't listen.
To who, Ma?
In fact, gritty realism seems to be a theme at this year's BAFTAs. Moonlight, the low-budget film about drug addiction in downtown Miami, has earned Naomi Harris a nomination and the film 4 in total.
You play with your friend?
Oh boy, we're gonna die out there. And by his own admission, Hugh Grant said today he wasn't exactly an award season favourite, but was very pleased to be nominated for his role in Florence Foster Jenkins. His co-star Meryl Streep is, of course, a BAFTA pro, earning her 15th nomination, despite yesterday being called overrated by Donald Trump. But film critics say La La Land is the one to beat. So what does director Ken Loach think of his main competition?
I don't go to film cinema as often as I should, so I haven't seen it, but I will do, of course.
You've done nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, in 1 month's time at the BAFTAs, we'll find out whether a gritty British drama can steal the thunder of a Hollywood musical. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
A strike by British Airways cabin crews led to a small number of flights from Heathrow Airport being cancelled. They've walked out in a row about pay. BA says passengers on 22 flights had to fly out earlier or later than they planned. And police are investigating after a small number of saline bags appeared to have been tampered with at Cumberland Infirmary. Hospital bosses found out last week and say there's no indication any patients have been harmed. The Post Office has announced the closure of 37 more branches with a loss of around 300 jobs. It says the move is because of changing consumer habits and the high cost of maintaining some premises. Football's World Cup is about to get even bigger. The tournament, which was last won by Germany in 2014, currently involves 32 teams, but from 2026 it's going to be expanded to 48. FIFA says it'll make it more inclusive. If you're about to sit down for your evening meal, here is something to think about. How much of it will end up in the bin? For many of us, probably too much. New figures show that back in 2015, households across the UK threw away £13 billion worth of food that could have been eaten. Tessa Chapman has a look now at what's being done about our waste.
Top of the list of the foods we waste is bread. Every day, 24 million slices end up in the bin. Many of our other staples go the same way. It doesn't make sense for our pockets or the planet, but we're still doing it. Do you eat all the food you buy?
Not all of it, no. Sometimes I throw it away. I think everybody does.
And why is that, do you think?
Maybe they buy too much.
A lot of offers. So you're asked, buy one, get another one half price.
An estimated 7.3 million tonnes of food waste was thrown away in 2015, the first rise in 10 years. More than half of it could have been eaten. That's enough to fill 37 million wheelie bins, or nearly 500,000 bin lorries. It's thought falling prices might have made us less careful. There are calls for the food industry to do more. Some of Britain's biggest retailers are trying out new ideas. Here in Sainsbury's, they've already completely stopped multi-buy offers to encourage customers to only buy what they need. And they're testing out a new smartphone app, which can see inside your fridge. So while you're shopping, you can check what you've run out of. The group which compiled today's data say we all need to take responsibility.
Make a list when you go shopping, and then you don't end up buying things you don't need maybe. Secondly, once you've done that, think about what the meals are that you're going to be cooking with it. Once you've cooked the meal, while you're doing it, make sure you measure the right amount so that you don't cook too much. And then if you do have some leftovers, because maybe somebody didn't end up there for dinner, put it in a little tub, keep it in the fridge, freeze it for lunch in a few days' time.
Simple advice, but we're not all taking it on board. And the food waste mountain continues to grow. Tessa Chapman, 5 News.
Now, have a look at this. It's being described as one of the most complicated snooker trick shots ever. It might start off looking a bit like golf, but from there, things get a lot more elaborate. We've had to speed it up a bit for you. The whole shot actually takes almost 2 minutes in total. Now, they use a mixture of snooker and pool tables, as well as plenty of cues and a mix of pool and golf balls. It was put together by staff at a sports bar in Bristol and is now been viewed more than 1 million times on Facebook. And as you can see, it ends with this pretty epic golf putt. Hooray. Well, earlier I spoke to the guy behind it, Shane O'Hara, who told me where the idea came from.
So this time last year, I devised a Christmas trick shot to create a little bit of marketing for All-Star Sports Bar. So did a pretty modest video. It was kind of a basic version of what we recorded on Saturday night. I got some good feedback, like 30,000-ish views. And I kind of put the whole thing on the back burner. It was a nice achievement. And then it kind of appeared on my feed again, which was a reminder, and it gave me a little bit of inspiration to do slightly more complex one, and
slightly more complex, not slightly, incredibly complicated. So how long did it take to set up, and how many goes did you have to get it right?
Yeah, it's sad. It's really sad, but it took about 8 hours from start to finish. 4.5 hours of setup and about 3.5 hours of bashing our heads against pool tables, figuring out why it wasn't working, and then 2 minutes of ecstasy at the end of it, where we did get it. About 100 takes, I'd say.
100 takes. And did it just get longer and longer, or did you must have been sick of it at the end?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to go home to bed, and that's the only trophy that I really got out of the whole thing. Great, getting my 15 seconds of fame now, which is great and everything, but it's been exhausting 48 hours since, really.
We're happy to give you the 15 seconds. What was the feeling like then when that golf ball right at the end ended up in the hole?
I just closed my eyes and kind of wanted to keep them closed and just sleep. So yeah, it's euphoric stuff, and it's great, and it's all worth, the 8 hours is worth it at the end. But yeah, up until the instant where it falls in the hole, I was regretting the entire experience, to be honest.
But now you've done it, Shane, it begs the question, you know, 1 million views, I'm sure it's going to go up. How are you going to top it? What are you going to do next?
So I do have a 1,000-foot putt in the pipeline, and the 500-foot putt got me one of my idols. It got me a tweet from one of my idols, Chris Wood, and I'm the biggest Tiger fan ever. So I'm angle shooting for a Tiger Woods retweet on the next one, and that's my life's ambition now since last Saturday.
Well, look, we can't promise Tiger Woods, but you know, at least you've been on 5 News tonight, which some people would kill for. Shane, thanks so much indeed.
Thanks a million.
That's almost it from us, but 8 years after he first became president, Barack Obama is preparing to deliver his farewell speech tonight. He's going to address crowds in Chicago, where, of course, he claimed victory back in 2008. We were hoping to bring you a bit of a discussion there about his legacy. Unfortunately, technology has beaten us. Might be something to do with that cold front that's coming across the Atlantic towards us. But we will, of course, bring you reaction to that speech by President Obama on 5 News Tonight tomorrow at 6:30. Next, though, Claire Nazir has the weather and Danny has updates throughout the evening. We'll see you then tomorrow. Bye-bye.